Thank you again for joining us for our first graduate student panel. I'm going to pass over to Thomas Calvié, who is our chair for this one, to take it away.
Well, thank you everyone for joining this panel. So today this panel is named Gaps and Boundaries, and we have three presenters on two different papers. So quickly, just about myself, I'm an MA student in the department, and I'm interested in international relations. So today we are thankful for having Josh as our discussant. Josh is a PhD candidate in our department, and he specializes in international relations with a minor in comparative politics. His research areas includes political violence, international security, and conflict processes, with a substantive focus on the internal dynamics of armed groups. Our presenters today, so we have Parker Lee. So Parker is also a PhD candidate in our department, and he's a current fellow at the Center for Chinese Research, the Institute of Asian Research at UBC. Prior to his graduate studies, Parker completed his BSc in Global China Studies from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Parker's research lies in the intersection of comparative politics and international relations, with a regional focus on China and Africa. He follows a mixed method approach and utilizes survey experiments, panel data analysis, and interview in his research. And his dissertation is titled 3 Essays on the Perception of Chinese and American Economic Activities in Africa. Then we have Katherine Poole. Katherine is an MA student in our department, where she also completed her BA in International Relations. She's originally from Guatemala, and in between her MA and BA, she worked at the European Commission in Luxembourg in the Health Security Unit, dealing with COVID-related matters. Her areas of interest are varied, including drug trafficking in Latin America, artificial intelligence, international development, and more recently, the political economy of chocolates. Her current research interest is the study of the cocoa supply chain, and more specifically on voluntary sustainability standards by chocolate manufacturers. And it's also commonly known as being to bar. And then finally, we have Hanne Schäfer. So Hanne studies European politics from different angles and sites. She completed her honors bachelor degree of arts in European study at Maastricht University, and is currently an MA student in our department. She locates herself in the interspace between political theory and comparative politics. Her interest revolves around historical references to contemporary societies, focusing on German and European memory politics. The primary question she asks is, where do definitions of and national narratives come from? What implications do they have? How do we draw the boundaries of societies? These are the sort of questions she asked, and we're looking forward. Hanne is awaiting an employment term at the Vancouver-based immigration law firm and writing her MA thesis on German partisan memory politics and immigration. So I'll let the presenters take it.
So we'll start first. We've titled this presentation "Balancing Caution and Progress: Addressing the Artificial Intelligence Governance Gap." I'm again Katherine and Parker. So we'll just get to it. So basically, an outline. We don't plan on talking for long. We'll try to be as concise as possible because a lot of it is sort of repetition along the way, and you'll hear us saying a few things over and over. So basically, we'll go through a quick introduction, a summary of the paper, what we mean by caution and progress, and then a conclusion where we'd love to have some feedback from you. So I'll hand it over to Parker.
Well, while waiting, I didn't know we were going to talk about the law topic. Otherwise, I would have asked ChatGPT to write it. Okay, so to make it clear, like the intention of our presentation, or the intention of the final product we want to do is actually to publish as an OPED in an outlet like the conversation. For people who are not familiar with the conversation, it's an online news website where the authors are mostly faculty members or professional practitioners. And for OPAD, they have very specific requirements. For example, what we want to do eventually is we want to write 1,000 to 1,500 words a piece, and the target audience is going to be non-specialist audience. And by non-specialist audience, basically means they are not like the public lay people. At the same time, they may not be the expert in the political science field. And in terms of format, what we want to do is we want to have one key single argument. However, due to the conversation, they are very specific format in the sense you also want to have 3 or 4 subsections, and within each subsection, there should be a sub-argument. So overall, we are looking for one key argument and that 3 or 4 small arguments to support that argument. Okay, yeah, perfect. Yeah, and this OPAD idea is actually based on a course paper, and in that course paper is for Eve's class, Globalization of Political Economy, something like that. No? Global governance, sorry. Yeah, and in that course paper, we identify 4 interconnected trends, which explains the global governance gap in AI and digital technologies. And because these 4 trends are very interconnected with each other, so we'll see lots of repeating things later, that is intentional. And in the paper, we also have some policy alternatives because it's a first-class paper. And however, today we're not going to talk about the policy part in today's presentation. If people are interested, we can talk about that in the Q&A section. And now we will talk about the trend.
Okay, so the first trend that we've identified is that there's concentrated investments, both at from private actors globally and also in certain countries worldwide. What we mean by this is that investment in AI and digital technologies is happening in very few either countries worldwide or through private actors globally. So if I can just get this next slide. So we're using this, it's been updated because the one that was used for the paper was actually from 2021. But this chart is basically saying where the private investment in AI is coming from. We can see United States and China are sort of United States is definitely the top player in terms of investment. And then what also we gather from this graph and the trends that are happening in investment is that it's not only the US and China, but it's also sort of localized in the global north. The only outliers that we see here are India and Argentina with some investments, at least in 2022. But the overall trend is that the investments are very concentrated in certain areas. And then if we have the next trend, we see that there's also concentration of AI research and development in limited few actors globally. What this means is not only what we saw in terms of investment, but also in terms of research and what is being produced. Most of the output is either American, there's also some Chinese research, there's European research as well, but it's still very, very concentrated. And what this means is, if I can just get the next slide, is that there's lack of attention to certain policies. So if AI research and development is being done in these specific areas, it concentrates in policy issues that are salient to these areas. So for example, it does a lot of healthcare, education, whereas the global south, if we can call it that, is left out because agriculture, tourism, and other things that are pertinent policies to these places of the world are not being targeted by AI and certain technologies. And another thing is sort of infrastructure as well. It's helpful for developing countries, but it's not being really targeted and included in these technologies.
Yeah, and the third trend is basically saying there is also a lack of international level coordination in terms of AI strategies. This is very different from other types of technology development. For example, in our department, there's actually a PhD student in Seoul. I think she's graduating. Yeah, her research is also on technology development, and she focused on 5G, Huawei, and other technology development. In those kind of development, you could see there are some national leaders, for example, China, United States, European Union, they not only have their own national strategies, at the same time, they want to be a global leader in the sense they also want to draft international global level strategies in terms of 5G development. However, in the AI, there's no such global coordination. At the same time, there's no single countries who want to be a leader. Don't get me wrong. When I say they don't want to be a leader, I'm not saying they don't want to invest, they don't want to develop, they do. However, they don't want to be a leader in terms of drafting global level strategies. One potential reason might be AI is so new, relatively speaking, and once you have certain regulations, it might limit those countries, especially when those countries are actually the first mover in this development sense. The next slide. The next slide, basically this map identifies the key countries and also the key groups. So basically now at global level, international organization level, whatever you call it, there are three major groups, G20, GPAI, and OECD. And within each group, we can identify certain countries. To be clear, not all of those countries have their own AI strategies. And if you are not in this map, you definitely don't have AI strategies. Okay. And the overlap we can see is really just on Australia, Canada, France, Germany, and basically are global north countries. And lots of these countries' strategies are very straightforward in the sense they have a goal, but they don't have very specific strategy in terms of how to achieve that goal, if that makes sense. Yeah, and if we remember the first slide in terms of global investment, we identify China and United States as leaders. We also want to point out that that's a total investment. So if we look at per capita, actually some European countries are not doing that bad. And also in terms of investment, when it's a misunderstanding when say, okay, China, United States doing very well, like in AI development. That's true. However, that development, lots of development is initiated by the private business. So when we look at the national strategies, lots of strategies more like a business proposal in terms of, okay, the government is going to invest how much money in this industry, that they don't know how the industry leaders are going to utilize this kind of money. And next slide. And more importantly, coming to the final trend is that the government have not been able to keep up with the speed of development and address the impact of these technologies. There are so many potential risks involved in AI development. We'll talk about some of the risks later. And but basically, there's no coordinated effort. There's no clear budget justification. There's no clear law or no regulation. Basically, the government is not ready at all, and therefore people should be cautious about AI development. And we will also talk about later is government have not been able to keep up with the speed of development. It is a fact. However, it doesn't mean we're doomed, because this kind of like lag of governments actually happens all the time in terms of industrial revolution, internet revolution, and others. So to a certain extent, this is expected. And now we're going to talk about.
Okay. So now this is where we want to talk about sort of why we need to be cautious. I mean, you've probably heard all of these arguments, especially this year with ChatGPT, but it's good to sort of highlight them and think about them again. So there's obviously concerns over biases. These systems depend on a lot of information, a lot of data, and it always comes down to who is providing the data, what sort of data is being fed into the systems, and then how the system sort of the information. And then there's also, as was sort of highlighted before with the trends, this idea that if the AI systems are being created in the global north, obviously the types of policies and types of concerns that are coming out of this are targeted for specific audiences, and then there's a risk of leaving certain groups underrepresented or not represented at all. So that's why there's issues on diversity and inclusion, especially if you don't have voices being sort of feeding into the system as well.
This also implies inequality. Inequality will also mean some different things. First, there's also inequality among different countries. As we showed earlier, the investment is really just concentrated in a few countries, and to be more specific, just a few companies. The first mover advantage is very evident in AI technology, and it will be very challenging, if ever possible, for countries that lack resources and talents to catch up in AI development. And Like, don't forget, even maybe for some of us, ChatGPT is quite common. I use that a lot to rewrite my emails. Yeah, however, ChatGPT is not the norm. We'll take a closer look at global scale, especially when we still have lots of people who don't have stable internet connection. Second, the inequality can be also expected within each country among individuals, or we can even say there's inequality among all individuals across countries. Like countries, individuals, they don't have the same type of resources or access to AI technologies. And even for people who do have access, not everybody knows how to utilize that tool. So having access doesn't mean you get the best out of it.
And then there's also concerns over ethics and privacy. So on the ethics, it's also talking about who gets displaced by these technologies. And on privacy, of course, we all know about, where is the information stored, who has access to our information, where it's going, where it's being stored, and generally concerns over our data. Okay, so what I did as an experiment for today is I asked ChatGPT what it had.
Slide.
Oh, sorry. Okay, what it had to say about the concerns that we should concerns over AI, and this is what ChatGPT had to say about it. So it says there are concerns about the impact of AI on employment, privacy, and security. As AI systems become more sophisticated and capable, they may displace jobs in certain industries and raise concerns over the privacy and security of personal data. There are also concerns about the potential for AI to be used in harmful ways, such as the development of autonomous weapons or manipulation of public opinion. And quick note here, I did not read this and then write our concerns. This was done after. But we can see some, the concerns that were, we thought about when we were writing this are sort of what is being discussed in, obviously the information that ChatGPT had to gather to give me this response. The only thing we forgot to mention or did not mention is the manipulation of public opinion, and I think that will be very critical, especially when thinking about democracy, what type of information we're getting as citizens, and anything coming up to elections could be harmful.
Yeah, basically it took 2 months to write a course paper and to ChatGPT 2 seconds.
I think it was harder to come up with the question than.
Excellent.
Okay, but we don't need to be alarmed. There's a lot to look forward in these technologies. So first of all, there's a lot of room for innovation and research, and also I think with ChatGPT and other technologies that are coming through, there's a lot of potential to be creative and to sort of think about how to solve problems. There's a lot of now, thinking about how to solve problems related to climate change. There's a lot coming there, and I think that's something to look forward for. So it's very new, it's very dynamic, and it changes sort of day by day.
Yeah, and there's a new poll just out yesterday from China asking people what are the most advantages you think from AI technology, and the number one is actually efficiency. So basically AI technology, or to be more specific, ChatGPT or other apps, they're very efficient, and more importantly, this efficiency can be tailored in the sense based on your own speaking style, based on the information you feed the technology, it will give you tailored answers based on your own personality. Another reason we don't need to be alarmed is, as I mentioned earlier, governments, they will catch up. From historical perspective, if we look at industrial revolution, internet, 5G, all the things, at the beginning, government is always lagging behind. So the issue is not about governance is late. The issue is more about how we can speed up this process to make sure governance can catch up. And by governance, not only the national level governance, but also because just like climate change and other issues, AI technology is not a single country thing.
And lastly, there's a lot of applications for AI, not just for writing term papers. There's been a lot recently specifically on healthcare, on AI being able to diagnose certain diseases beforehand, certain patterns. There's also, a lot of hype over self-driving cars and what it means for sort of driving safely. And then I was going to say something else and I just forgot it. But yeah, there's a lot of new things coming. Oh yeah, and also it allows for more efficiency in terms of the work that we can do, especially if we know how to use it properly.
And here is another question and answer from ChatGPT. So basically, for ChatGPT, the advantage would be there are many potential benefits of AI, such as increased efficiency, number one, improved accuracy, personalized experience, advancement in healthcare, safety, environment, with proper safeguards. Thank you so much for that. With proper safeguards and ethical consideration, these benefits can be realized while minimizing the risk and challenge associated with AI. And if you have time, if you want, you can also ask the same question in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT may give you different answers. And the next page.
But again, this was after.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically that concludes our presentation. And before we go to the next panel, we just want to ask people how to narrow down the scope of the paper, because we do think there's a lot going on. And if possible, what could be expanded here. And I also want to quickly comment on some policy alternations. We know now that there are so many similar OPAC on AI, and there are so many similar arguments. That's why in the original course paper, there's a policy part we want to talk about, and some potential policy recommendation would be, for example, you need to have more social scientists, including political scientists, in the designing stage of that. Not only consult them after the program, you should include them from the beginning. And also, it's actually very interesting because everybody talks about ethical teams, but actually Microsoft, they just fired their only ethical team in ChatGPT development for some budget reasons, apparently. Yeah, and there are some other policy alternations, and if people think that's more important, we can also talk about that later. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Parker. Thank you so much, Catherine. This is a very interesting topic, and we're looking forward to what you will come up with the policies. So now we're going to switch to Hanne, who will be talking about right-wing memory politics.
I don't think there's a good transition to AI memory politics, but I'm going to try. So I'm presenting on German memory politics, and more specifically on right-wing memory politics and anti-immigration agendas.
Put it at here.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, more specifically about right-wing memory politics and anti-immigration agendas in contemporary Germany, titled The German Folk and Its Boundaries. This work builds on two recent trends. First, the vast expansion of memory politics in the past decades, and second, the strong academic and, to some extent, societal interest in rising anti-immigration parties in contemporary Europe, and probably beyond. Before I begin, how many of you actually have an idea of what I'm talking about when I say memory politics? That's like 2 or 3 halves. Okay, let's aim for more. Just how I understand memory politics and how I'm going to use it here. I put a definition.
Don't point it at that.
This is going to be
The other one.
Oh, okay. So the concept of memory politics enables scholars to study the generation of collective understandings of a nation, community, or group by giving historical meaning to specific places or moments. This is based on a definition provided by Fawcett-Weiner. This brings me to my research question. Which is, how do memory politics and historical narratives intersect with right-wing partisan positions on immigration in Germany? By studying this question, I seek to find a novel nuance to anti-immigration positions stemming from parties' historical imagination of a national community. As I said, this paper focuses on Germany, which, despite its special position in the field, Germany has experienced recent contestations of both the collective memory as well as immigration positions in the recent decades. Okay, let's get right to it.
Is it working? No?
It probably is.
It's okay, I'll take care of it.
So in the literature, German memory politics are linked to the term Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which can be translated to something like, it's a very long word, but we put all the things that you put in 3 or 4 words into one word.
Short.
So Vergangenheitsbewältigung, which basically means dealing with the past, and it refers to a critical reckoning or reprocessing and teaching about the horrors and crimes of Nazism and the Holocaust between 1933 and 1945. Such critical reckoning has been institutionalized in the 1990s, which was brought about as Rüstenberg, another author, claims by grassroots activism in the 1970s. Rüstenberg also criticized that German memory culture at this point falls short to allow for continuous open discussion and collective memory, causing what she calls an rigid memory landscape. However, such official memory culture is being challenged by the anti-immigration party Alternative for Germany, which I'm going to call AfD now, to which, founded in 2012 in response to the Euro crisis. For my study, the relationship between memory politics and anti-immigration positions is specifically interesting in the case of a populist right-wing party. First, because populist parties claim the representation of a specific definition of the people, and second, according to Van Spanje, a Dutch author, such definitions are often based on cultural criteria on the right spectrum. So it becomes interesting to see how the AfD defines society, to which the criteria of entry are decided. Right. Let's go to the theoretical lens. To do that, memory politics as a theoretical lens allows me to study the creation of a specific German society by the AfD. I use memory politics to describe 2 practices here. First, giving the past a specific meaning, which fits into a specific narrative of German society today. And second, the hierarchization of memories through the selection of some important moments, whereas others are defined as negligible. The invention of such collective memory can then serve to create or affirm a political, cultural, or social group. And to bridge that to immigration, I'm using Willem Schinkel's critical concept of emergent societies, which he refers to as a sociological notion of society, which often implied when scholars research the integration of immigrants into a particular society. And this is all in. So the notion of society is often studied as an opposing entity to immigrants who are expected to integrate into such society. And society then rhetorically becomes an order with a border, what he says, determined by those with power in the academic, political, or journalistic discourses on immigration. Logically, such a connotation suggests that political parties and those in a position of political power rhetorically create a historic image of a society which determines how and who should be included in that political entity. In line, I'm skipping this part because of time. Thank you. Turning to methods, in line with the assumption of memory politics and the rhetorical narration of a society, I adopt a discursive analytical approach. Schinkel again refers to immigration discourses as toxic discourses, taking place through power relations. And I therefore chose a critical discourse analysis sensitive to hierarchization and othering. I'm not focusing here on like the relationship between a right-wing party and how they depict immigrants, because I think that has been done a lot, but rather on its special connection to memory politics. Yes, so to study the relationship between historical narratives and immigration positions, I analyzed the most recent party program called, this is the German title, but Germany But Normal, program of the Alternative for Germany for the election to the 20th German Bundestag, which itself may deserve to be studied, calling it that, but that might be for another time. So I mixed the deductive and inductive method, and yeah. So let's get into the analysis. So first I focused on who is the German society according to the AfD in their manifesto. The notion of society, which is used by the AfD, is the Volk. Volk generally refers to the term the people, which are bound by ethical, cultural, national, or linguistic boundaries. The word itself has changed its meaning over time, but in this context, it's used almost 40 times in the program, and compared to, for example, the Green Party program, they choose Bevölkerung, which is a territorial notion of the people, rather than based on heredity. In general, I found that the AfD creates a very exclusionary notion of society. Through the practice of othering, the party program rhetorically puts the concept of the Volk in contrast with refugee Muslims and sometimes other EU states, which can be seen in the following quote. Oh, sorry, you can go back. We no longer trust governments and parliaments to find viable solutions to currency crisis, migration, Islamization. The people as the sovereign must be the bearers of such fateful decisions in direct co-determination. So we see that the current parliament and government page represent the Volk, and also that the notion of the people excludes migrants and Islam. Sorry, to find my point. Yes. So the normatively sovereign Volk therefore stands in contrast to issues of EU supremacy, Islam, and migration. We further see that the notion of who should be included in the Volk and benefits from the state is based on an effective integration. The initial notion of welfare for all, according to the manifesto, excludes refugees and Muslims who refuse to undergo effective integration. Moreover, German migration politics should be protecting the interests of Germans and already immigrated citizens who are committed to German cultural identity. Such German identity is coined by the German language, our values, our history, and culture. Sorry, this should be all in quotation marks here. To determine the inclusion criteria, therefore, of German society, the party program puts forward a cultural and historical criteria. When I looked at what to remember, I found the portrayal of that the AfD puts forward as a very positive German past, which builds on Enlightenment ideas such as the dedication to reason and progress that has led to rich scientific and artistic contributions. And German society also builds on Christian and humanistic culture that has brought about civilization and freedom. So moreover, instead of critical reckoning with the German responsibility for the Holocaust, the AfD writes about the unfair vilification of the German Empire and doesn't mention the low points, how they call it, in the entire program. They write, German history must be appreciated in its entirety. The official culture of remembrance must not only focus on the low points of our history, but must also keep an eye on the high points. A people without national consciousness cannot exist in the long run. Yes. So now, how does that link to immigration? Which is the interesting part to me, and this part of the analysis has been done inductively, which means that I might overestimate some of my findings, but nevertheless, there seems to be significant connection. So the connecting mechanism between the AfD's understanding of an historical German society and its immigration agenda is the party's claimed duty to protect the values and achievements inherited by German society. The word protecting, which is Schutz or Schützen, is used 101 times in the 200-page party manifesto, and while only in a few occasions it's directly linked to the protection to a collective memory, It often advocates the protection of inherited values of Christianity, German civilized culture, and rich history of progress through the protection of geographical borders. This last quote says, the disastrous consequences of unregulated mass immigration since 2015 are unmistakably and continue to worsen. Disproportionate immigrant criminality, terrorist attacks, and Islam separatism are proof of this. Are the costs in the triple-digit billions, housing shortage, and high unemployment among immigrants. Successful integration cannot and will not succeed in this way. It does so, the AfD does so, through the othering of immigrants and Muslims, as well as the hierarchization of German society that is inheriting such rich and positive history, and therefore needs protection from those contrasted with the civilized and civilizing German society. So to conclude, and answer the question, how do memory politics and historical narratives intersect with partisan positions on immigration in Germany? I tentatively argue that the AfD's anti-immigration position builds on the party's claimed duty to protect German historic society by protecting the country's cultural and geographical borders.
Thank you so much, Hannah, for this fascinating history of German politics and memory politics in Germany. So now we're going to move on to the Q&A question part. And no, first, sorry. We're going to go with our discussant, Josh, who's going to ask his questions about the paper.
Yeah. That's okay. As long as everybody can hear me and all that. So yeah, thank you for kind of having me as the discussant for the panel. These papers are a bit outside my area of expertise, so hopefully the comments will be helpful and let me through my little area perhaps. Let's start with I think it's a really relevant topic right now, especially with ChatGPT this year, and I think there's lots of really excellent kind of governance implications. And it doesn't play a big role in your piece, but I think it's also an area in which members of industry have really explicitly called for regulation. So perhaps there's more opportunities for governance there than there might be otherwise. That is maybe a hooker and open for you. I think my big point is, and it's something you actually said in the presentation, but I didn't really find too much in the paper itself, is that people are really bad at predicting the effects of new technologies. You kind of mentioned maybe the shift is about how governments can catch up rather than how governments can almost like predict, write legislation to predict effects that they don't maybe have a full understanding of. And I think it's an issue because, given we're often really bad at predicting the effects of new technologies, it's really hard to design legislation at the very beginning of that kind of technological change to protect against negative shocks and outcomes. This is not a perfect example, but the one that came to mind. The seatbelt was mandatory very long after the car, first rolled off the lot, right? Like 60 years or something. Model T came out and seatbelt mandatory. So I think we've gotten a lot better at policy intervention since then, but I think some of the kind of maybe work with the piece is narrowing down like one type thing that you want to do with it. So if that is like how governments can legislate faster, I think that's quite interesting, right? Maybe there's some room there to touch on some democratic innovations and kind of other elements, and use AI as almost like a framing piece to talk about how governments can speed up legislation. Because I think for an op-ed, it's helpful to have a really clear take really quickly with a straightforward policy implication. And as a reader, I'd kind of like to know what that take is a lot faster than I do right now in the article. I think the paper takes a little while to get there, and the op-eds also has in the first paragraph, right, are kind of getting that a couple other things to maybe just think about. I don't want to eat too much time. Firms are noticeably absent from the piece. A lot of the things are kind of at the national level, but Google has more AI publications than any university, right? And are driving so much innovation and investment, and considering them, I think, crucially as actors that are very different from states, will fit into the governance piece in a pretty big way. So that's something I would kind of touch on if you go that tighter governance route. And partially, I'd say if you go that kind of tighter governance route, because like I said, I think there are a few different ways you might want to go. One thing that comes up through the thread of the paper and the presentation a lot is kind of the equitable distribution of technology. It's something that seems to be a big interest in the piece, which I think is really interesting. But then I would kind of pick that lane rather than maybe other lanes, and that'll help you maybe down to that 1,000 words, as well as kind of give it a bit of focus and maybe more of a clear policy direction to take away. A little bit connected to both like the legislation element and kind of the speed of development, technological change, as well as the equity distribution problem. What is different about AI than all these other kind of technologies that are not equitably distributed? So you think about like pharmaceutical technology and patents, those aren't equitably distributed in any kind of real way, right? So what makes AI different? Why should AI be different if that's a normative argument you want to make? And I think for Canadian outlets, there's an argument that you could really focus on what the Canadian government could do to legislate away some of these kind of risks. If it is a focus on the equitable distribution of AI technology, then I would kind of explicitly make that and strip away everything else that I said, sorry. And I can send you some other comments if you want, but I think that's a good place to start. Really helpful. Right, memory. So I think this is a really interesting topic, and the link between memory politics and Germany is really strong, quite evident. I think that works quite well. That said, I would probably do more to motivate or justify the case selection. I don't think it's a bad case in any stretch, but it's just not entirely clear exactly why that is the case. And even if it's sort of a reasonably convenient case, I'd probably dedicate a little bit more time to discussing the strengths and limitations of the case, the natural extensions, to look at other cases, and then maybe more documents and things like that. Possible ways to kind of think through that might be like the rebuilding case or an exploratory one. On conceptually, what I think is still a little unclear to me is how ideas of society and nation generally, if you kind of think like Benedict Anderson and all these kind of arguments, ideas are different from the ideas put forward by FJ. I know how they're different in the specific, but in terms of separating like what right-wing parties do, kind of a general sense, what is really different about the kind of society and memory politics that they're putting forward. I think we can see the effects really clearly in some of the evidence that you bring forward, but conceptually from the beginning, it's not clear how easily they would be split. Like, I think they could both fall kind of into similar categories if they're telling stories about what it means to be German, and they pick on different examples for sure, but identifying deductively, I guess, beforehand how they choose those examples will help strengthen the argument and help distinguish what AFD does quite differently from what the idea of Germany advanced by other political parties. And I think to do that, I really lean more into the example of the focus on the German Empire. That's one example that really worked, I think, quite well, at least for me in the paper, and it seemed like a really clear distinction in party positions. Because I imagine, I don't know a lot about politics, but I imagine other parties would be happy to champion the scientific and artistic successes of historical German people, right? They might not do it actively and whatnot, but they probably wouldn't deny that there were some big contributions there. So that's why I think the Empire part works really quite well. And then, yeah, and then I guess comparing really explicitly how AFD operationalizes that idea of German history in comparison to other parties. So you can maybe make a clearer connection to why they're doing that for voters and why voters might be part of that story. So I'll send you these as well, because I have lots of thoughts. But I think the other thing to think about here is that, do people vote for AFD because of a belief about the memory of that kind of, like what's the direction of causality here? And yeah, that's kind of the shorthand is what's the direction. And then also, even for the party, so it's true for voters, but it can also be true for the party as well, right? Are they constructing history and then using that to support their views on immigration? Or do they have immigration policies and then look back to construct some version of history? I think that's very hard to kind of sort out, but some engagement with that and the tricks that poses could be really quite useful or beneficial. And then I think I would talk a little bit more about figure 1, but maybe we can do that offline. Yeah, thank you so much for figures.
Thank you so much, Josh, for the comments. Now we're going to move to the Q&A. So if you have any question for the presenter, please ask away. Yeah, Aish.
So Hannah, I really enjoyed your paper. I thought it was super interesting. I like how you engaged with the question of who are the people that have haunted us, everyone, for so long, but especially Germany when you look at the history of German political thought. That was super interesting. I was wondering, and I like the categories of your discourse analysis of examining who are the people who what is German society and then what to remember. I was wondering if you considered examining an additional temporal / temporariness constructed discourse around immigration, because in a lot of especially European anti-immigrant discourse, there's this constructed temporariness to all immigrants, even if they're second or third generation. Their existence within the state is seen as inherently contingent because they're others. So I was wondering if that's something considered looking into, or how you might see that fitting into the plan.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think specifically when you compare the different parties and how they position themselves temporariness, whatever, is temporariness is quite a distinction between the different parties, whether they think this term also of the guest worker who came in the 60s, and whether they expected them to stay or to leave, or how also people deal with whether the integration of these families and their descendants have been successful. So I think I chose this project to be my thesis and extend it to different parties in the German party system. And I think that especially temporariness will be a very interesting comparing factor then.
I did both presentations, so one question for
Speak up, man.
Yeah, no, I'm coming to it. So this, and I mean, it's very interesting, but the thing that I found probably most interesting is the question of governance gap, especially the kind of speed problem, right? This has been a big problem for, I guess, modern governance for a long time. I think you mentioned the Industrial Revolution, especially in the 19th century, the idea that somehow the way government works, they're always kind of lagging behind, right? So you have, of course, also the problems here about what's going to be the size. Is it going to be global, national, company-wide? I can see that. But maybe I would more specifically want to hear, I mean, yeah, it seems like partly because the developments are lightning fast often, right? Partly because I guess you don't really know how the jurisdiction any kind of look like global or national. So in part because like, what are the kind of existing ways of thinking about the gap, the temporal gap here, right? Because it does take time, especially if things like AI, it's probably the gaps are probably even more visible. And whether you can learn anything from the past, right? Whether from the, say, example of the Industrial Revolution or the some of the 20th century developments. And if there's any literature on this, on that particular problem, might also be worth reading on, because these are the things that are really stood out for me from your presentation. One question for you, really interesting. One thing that your presentation made me think of. So firstly, okay, so in German, I mean, Volk, I guess, I see that often gets considered as the people, but the uses of it also seems like close to the nation, right? And maybe is there any kind of tension between the two categories in your kind of, the kind of stuff that you're looking at? In particular, because you see, I mean, increasingly this looks like, it used to be the case for left-wing politics, those who are more interested in more of the emancipatory narrative of peoplehood. The memory politics often worked quite well, right? If you think about since the French Revolution, there's always kind of stories of redemption of the majority, the masses, either as serfs, as proletariat, what have you, right? But these days, it's becoming quite difficult for left-wing politicians or left-wing politics to work with memory, right? The right-wing politics often find it much easier to work with it. What used to be the case for many left-wing politics, the nation and the people would sleep very well. They would basically one would collapse into the other, and it would be fine. These days, you don't really see it as much. People are very skeptical of the nation category. Right-wing politics, it looks like we're seeing that a lot more. So this kind of your exploration of memory politics in Germany, and I mean, does it basically shed any light on this? The comparative, basically, right-wing, left-wing kind of approaches to this question, and maybe the nation people question, the tension or overlaps.
Okay, we're gonna try to answer this. Yeah, that's a very interesting remark. It's also the left party is like the next party on my timeline to try this framework on. And I think it's specifically, like, they're both populist parties, right? So they need to define the people at some point in some way. And what is interesting in Germany is that it's like geographically quite split. Not quite split, that's one word, but like how they understand the unification of Germany in 1990, and the meaning of kind of how that political system transitioned into what it transitioned now. So what I'm expecting, I don't know if that is true, but that the GDR, like the German Democratic Republic, that their narratives at that point, both the AfD and the Linke, the left, suggest an alternative memory of what happened there. I excluded it of this analysis, but not the analysis, but the presentation. But they also kind of put forward an alternative memory of that unification in the party program, the AfD, specifically saying we are kind of determined to get these memory days for GDR citizens institutionalized and things like that. So I'm expecting a tension there in between the left, because obviously they need to make sense of that moment in a different way than the right, but it's both alternative to what's been institutionalized.
But in our initial discussion, I remember Parking saying, thinking about these other revolutions, to think how it is that governments have sort of reacted to them and bringing that into AI. So I think there's a lot there that we can ultimately investigate. And then I think it relates to the point of why we're focusing on AI. And I mean, it's obviously something that is going to be with us for a really, really, really long time. So I think it's important. It's a very important thing that you bring up of thinking about other revolutions and how governments kept up with those revolutions. And then back to Josh's point, and why is AI sort of this why is it that the gap is here and now, and why haven't we been able to keep up with it? I think that's very important.
Yeah, I was going to, I think Josh mentioned there's a lack of discussion on industry and private business, that's right. I think one potential reason might be the framing of the presentation paper. I think, for example, when talk about China, United States, national. But if you look close at the data, when looking at the United States, the money, the budget from the US government per se is limited. Lots of money is actually from the Microsoft, Google, China, from Baidu, or some other private company. So to a certain extent, we can actually replace that, like instead of the United States, you can just say American business. But I do agree with that there is a distinction between government and a private business, and that might be a potential reason why there's a gap, or like why the government doesn't know what to do, because the government, politicians, policymakers, they don't have expertise on that, and when they try to draft certain policies, what they do, especially like in the case of China and the United States, they will have something called special task force. And most of the people on that will be consultants or business managers, or sometimes data scientists, or like scientists in general on them. However, those people are dominantly hired by those private businesses, and so they have their own interests, let me put it that way. For example, if there's this new task force in the United States, and there's one scientist basically from Microsoft, basically their argument is like some like IP stuff, so we need to protect like things, but we also have people from Google who saying it's a public good, so the OpenAI should not only publish the result, but also their coding or something like that. Yeah, I mean, for me, that's really because they belong to different companies, they have their own interests. But I agree with, I think that's something to think about. But I think the key takeaway I take from Josh's argument is where, like, how we wrote this for a course paper. So at that time, we had specific goal, it's going to be a course paper. And now we try to distribute it to other channels. And the reason we focus on OPAD, one reason was actually what you mentioned earlier is lots of OPAD pieces on AI now is very specific. For example, you may read one piece just saying data regulation, and then the whole thing is about data regulation. There's another piece just saying privacy, like exclusion or like inclusion, whatever. That's so focused. However, we believe that is not correct because of the things. I think what I want to say is I understand that the OPAD or sometimes news media, they may want a very target specific information they want to tell the audience, but that may actually overlook how complicated this issue is. And if we just look at data privacy issues, or if we just look at potential AI applications, we're missing the whole picture here. And that's why our key argument, maybe we should emphasize more, is we should be cautious and but not alarmed at the same time. That's actually the key argument. And our two subsections is, one subsection is why we should be alarmed, or we should not be alarmed, and the other one is why we should be cautious of what's going on. But I think maybe we should change maybe the writing or the formatting or something to make it more accessible or something. I hope that makes sense.
We have Apsoon, sorry, in the queue that's going to maybe go to you, Kim, to close out. Is that okay with you, Apsoon?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, you're good to go, Apsoon.
All right. Can you all hear and see me because I'm driving, so this is fun.
I'm gonna get you up here just a sec.
Oh, nobody needs to see me. This is fine. I'm just saying.
We can see you.
Fabulous. All right. This is not funny. Okay.
Watch the road. Watch the road.
Okay, I'm just gonna say, if this is not commitment to our graduate program, I don't know what is. But let's get to the question. So Hanne, I really like this project. I think it's a really kind of it can lead to like a really rich project. So my kind of question is very similar to one of the comments that Josh made on the paper, which is to try to figure out whether or not you think that collective memory is a catalyst or a tool. And I think there's a big difference, because I think if it is a tool, it's just something that you can use in a toolbox of in a anti-immigrant, we want to have certain political positions, we're populist political parties, and we're going to use this collective memory to kind of connect what we are saying to the past to kind of create this narrative. That would be it as a tool. Now, as a catalyst, it would be something that would be driving the kind of political leanings of both populist political parties, but also people who support them. And the reason why I think it's important for you to try to see if you can kind of clean this up and figure it out is that it would go against a lot of what the literature on populism tells us populist thought is, which is very thin ideology, and it doesn't actually have any kind of particular roots to it. So I think there is like a potential for you to do something more than what you were saying here. That's the kind of question comment that I have. Another thing that I think is useful for you to look at, again, kind of drawing on what Josh was already telling you, I have no original thoughts. These are all Josh's ideas that I'm just like, is if you were going to do some sort of like a comparison to another kind of case, might I suggest the Netherlands? Leah Clarenbeek, who was a PhD student at University of Amsterdam, has done work on like similar kind of anti-immigrant attitudes and the kind of drawing on the history of the Netherlands, but her focus on what was on like the ways in which the integration narrative in the Netherlands was particularly kind of driven by like the kind of history of who we are as Dutch people. And her findings were that, in fact, people like the more like Muslim people integrated into the Netherlands and took jobs as teachers and nurses and doctors, the more people who were already anti-immigrant became anti-immigrant. So the integration was actually going against it. So they were like feeling like they were taking these roles that they shouldn't in society because those were particularly Dutch roles for you to have. These were the jobs that only Dutch people should have. If you're going to be a doctor, if you're going to be a lawyer, if you're going to be a teacher. So I don't know. I think it might be worth looking at that if you decide to do like a little bit of a comparative thing. That's all. But great presentation and great project. I'm really excited.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Kim, we're running out of time, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's a quick question for AI. I was just wondering, you mentioned that there's a couple of governments that have adopted like small policy here and there, like both sides. It might be interesting to compare like what policy's been adopted and who's like more at the forefront of this. Like if you really want to take the policy focus, like comparing the multiple thing that has been adopted might be a relevant platform.
We say that like in the paper, we talk about actually Eve's his work on, it's a comparison between the US, China, India, and the EU. So there is that already in terms of what they're doing, how they're doing it. But yeah, it's a good addition to thinking about who's moving it and in what direction they're moving, because the EU is more focused on GDPR, for example, whereas others might be more interested in innovation and research.
Can you just quickly add something? I think there's something that could be interesting is OpenAI, so the people, the research lab who did ChatGPT, their goal is to make AI open to everyone and that no one is holding AI in their own hands. But it seems like with your investments graph, that it's not actually what is happening. It's in the end of the global north, as you put it. So I wonder how, looking at, like if you're looking at a policy, how policy could mirror what the creator of those AIs aim to do. So this is the end of our panel. Thank you so much for attending.